Welcome to webinar 2 of Lesson Study, Truly Inspired Professional Learning, offered by CalPro, the California Adult Literacy Professional Development Project, a state leadership project of the California Department of Education, Adult Education Office. I'm Sue Pon, and I'll serve as your MC this afternoon. Your presenter is Jacques Lecour.
Hi, Sue. Hi, everyone. I'm Jacques, and I'm really happy to be part of this webinar today, part 2 of lesson study. And I think what's going to come out today is touching on my personal experience through my colleagues who are going to be sharing regarding lesson study today. And we hope that today you will be able to get a really good taste of some of the key components and activities of each of the phases of lesson study, as well as some insights from our guests.
So as you know, we are also joined by Sachiko Oates and Laura Buell of CalPro, but also we have 2 special guests. 2 adult education lesson study practitioners, Lisa Gonzalez and Audrey Sakai. And now they'll introduce themselves.
I'll go first. Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for coming. I'm Lisa Gonzalez. I currently work as an ESL instructor for Alameda Adult School in the Bay Area. I have been working in adult education for, I think this is my 16th year now. And I was fortunate enough to participate in lesson study many years ago. And even though it was quite a while back, I can still very assuredly say that it was one of the most impactful professional development experiences I've had in my entire career. We're going to share a lot with you about our experience today, but in a nutshell, I'll say it's kind of like professional development at light speed. It gives you, even 12 years later, it just gives you a different lens on being reflective about what's happening in your classroom, which then plays into how you approach your lesson planning. So I'll leave it at that for right now, and I'll hand it over to Audrey.
Yes. Hi, everyone. My name's Audrey Sakai, and I, when I did lesson study back 10 years ago or so, that was with Oakland Unified, OACE, Oakland Adult. And and I just want to say that, like what Lisa said, that the experience was so impactful that although the details are fuzzy, it was 10 years ago, but what it left me with on an emotional level, also, as I'm still teaching now, it still informs just the way that I think about lessons, the way I think about students. And the biggest change, I think, was to be more of an observer and a learner in the classroom along with your students, and not a set agenda. And this lesson study process forced me to do that. And that has stuck with me, and it's impacted my whole life too, my personal life too, in looking at life more as a learner and with a question rather than an answer before I even, know what the question is. So I'm happy to be here. I'm happy that Lisa and I can share a little bit of, what we experienced.
You're on mute, Sue.
Thank you, Jacques. Thank you, Lisa and Audrey. We're so fortunate that you can join us today, because I think it's important for our participants in this webinar to hear directly from you. So let's take a look at the overview of this webinar series. The next one, Jacques. Yes. Last week in Lesson Study, the Why and the What, you described effective professional learning as practical and interactive. We saw that research affirmed your thinking, and that lesson study is both practical and interactive. Some of the questions you raised last week were about implementation in adult education, which we'll focus on today in lesson study, the how. And then next week, we'll address your questions asked in webinars 1 and 2, as well as new ones in lesson study office hours. Our objectives for this series is to increase student learning and to inspire effective professional learning. Our objective for today is for you to number 2, better understand the elements of each phase of the lesson study cycle to begin considerations for planning and implementation. So I hope that you all feel comfortable with Poll Everywhere as a way of participating in this webinar series. So let's take a moment to log in. You can join by QR code, by web, or text. So take a moment to do that now. And as a reminder, your individual responses are anonymous. However, the content will be shared in the webinar. Sachiko, does it look like people are logged in?
Yes, let me share my screen so you can all see.
Okay, so here are 2 starting questions. What thoughts have been on your mind since webinar 1, the why and the what? And what do you hope to learn from this webinar, the how? If you could help us to identify the second question by using words like, I hope to learn. People are excited, yay. Is there any data on virtual lesson study? Good question. How to implement. We hope to address that today and more also in webinar 3 next week. Examples of projects. I think maybe that may be one for next week, Jacques.
Probably.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Very good. Any other? Oh, here's a few more.
Virtual.
Something to look into. All right, so let's look at our agenda for this afternoon. We want to give Audrey and Lisa as much time as possible to speak. There we go. Speak with you. So toward that end, Jacques will quickly talk about implementation. It will be fast, but we can revisit it and your questions in more detail next week. We encourage all your questions in the chat and in Poll Everywhere. And we thank you in advance for your awareness and understanding of this fast pace. For questions specifically to Audrey and Lisa, please note as such in the chat. It still can be for everyone, but so that we don't save that question for next week, and we'll try to address your questions to them this week. So without further ado, here we go. Jacques?
Okay. All right, so let's start with a recap, a very brief recap of what we shared last week. These are the phases of the lesson study cycle. There is a link that you see there at the bottom of the slide, and I want to take this moment to again recognize and thank Dr. Catherine Lewis and her group at the Mills College Lesson Study Group website, where much of the information that we're sharing was derived, and where you can go to learn almost everything you need to know about lesson study and how to implement it as well. In any case, here are the 4 phases. We're going to peek at some high-level elements of each phase. And again, this is meant to be sort of a quick introduction, just to begin to increase your familiarity with some of the elements, some of the steps and characteristics of each of the phases. This is not an in-depth training. We hope to continue to whet your appetite for that. One thing that is important to take a look at for some perspective, I think, is differences in approaches to professional learning. As has been said a couple of times already, lesson study has been a well-developed and fully integrated part of Japan's education system for more than half a century. And Japan's international rankings in terms of national education systems is consistently high, and the professional learning approach really contributes to that. As you can see from this graphic, in Japan, a huge percentage of teachers' professional learning time is concentrated on planning lessons collaboratively and watching and discussing each other's classroom lessons. Whereas our tradition in the States focuses a lot more on curriculum writing and individual lesson planning. So you can see that it kind of flips our style on its ear. And this really contributes a lot to the deep learning and the application of learning of better and better instructional practices in Japan, and is starting to be replicated here very often in K-12, not quite yet in adult ed. So lesson study groups start off with some basic questions that they keep in mind right from the outset, and then revisit at the end of a lesson study cycle to check their work, so to speak. Lesson study aims to make a clear and measurable impact on student learning and teacher learning, and it does this through a classroom-based focus on student learning. It is maybe the most student-centered activity that we can do in terms of professional development. When we see and can measure that students have learned to a high degree, then we know that we as teachers are learning and practicing what really works for our students. We develop a sharper understanding of how students think and how they problem solve, and it makes all of our future lesson planning even better. Okay, so let's take a look at the steps just to peek into each one. And we're going to start with prepare, which is not a formal step in the lesson study cycle. Nevertheless, it is absolutely necessary in order to get off to a good start. So it's really critical to attend to all of these items that you see on the screen. They're kind of basic startup items. If you've been through professional learning community training, all of this should look extraordinarily familiar to you. It's really identical to the kind of startup that professional learning community teams do. And remember, as we said last week, lesson study is a form of professional learning communities. Let's see. When you are thinking of types of teams that are possible for lesson study, teams makeups vary greatly. Many types of teams are possible and quite viable. So you see some examples here. Content alike teams, teachers who teach the same thing at more or less the same level, are the most common types of teams, but there are all kinds. across proficiency levels, across disciplines. Some are based at a particular site, some are across schools or across systems. Any one of them can work well as long as it's organized well in advance and everyone is on the same page about what you're doing and why. But one thing that we really recommend when it comes to starting lesson study is to start small and to start with a willing group. There's a lot to learn, and it's much easier to manage that with a small group of willing participants than an entire organization of folks who may or may not be excited about it yet. It's good to start with a group that is willing to be excited about it from the outset and to let the good news of lesson study spread organically, starting from a small group. In terms of roles and expectations, educators take on a number of different roles within lesson study. They are all very, very important, and you can see here the basic roles. The one I want to focus on in terms of saying an extra word or two is the facilitator role. And I wish I'd known this better back when I did lesson study. The facilitation of a lesson study group goes a long way towards initial success and continued success. A good facilitator makes the flow of the cycle feel efficient and effective and safe for participants. Good facilitation minimizes the natural bumps in the road that every group is bound to encounter. Whenever you're trying something new as a team, you're going to run into some problems and issues that you couldn't possibly have been aware of until they come up. A good facilitator who's been given time and support to plan in advance can really do a lot to minimize that kind of bump in the road experience. So again, all of these roles critically important if you do decide to implement lesson study. We advise that you pay particular attention to the facilitator role. Okay, so all of that was prepare, and now we're going into phase one of the formal cycle, which is study. So from the Mills website, which I mentioned a little earlier, you can download a document, a template called the Teaching Learning Plan. And that document guides you from start to finish in the entire lesson study cycle. Embedded in the Teaching Learning Plan is a section for the research lesson that the team develops. But that template is really a wonderful tool to keep everyone on track. It makes all of the processes transparent. Everyone knows where they're going just by looking at the next step in the tool. So we're just going to look at a couple of aspects of the study phase. And one of them is studying standards, research, and curricula. And the reason that this is done is that you have chosen a topic, remember, that it is important to you because students are having difficulty learning it, and naturally it means we as teachers are having some challenge teaching it. And so if we're going to pay attention to it in depth, we should step back, be open and curious, and learn anything and everything related to the topic that we've chosen that will help us understand it more deeply, help us get on the same page about how we all understand the topic. And there are all different kinds of items that we can look at together, or we can look at individually and then bring our individual perspectives together to the group to share. So standards, frameworks, research, instructional strategies, books, media, anything that might be informative to help us get the best possible handle on the topic that we're working on including asking others to come in and speak with us if they have some particular expertise or insight that we think would be helpful for us to prepare to proceed with the planning. All right, let's see here. Okay, let's see. So that's the study phase. And now we go to the next phase, which is plan. And here are the main steps of the plan phase. It's what we do as we co-create and collaborate the research lesson. And we're going to look into just a few of the details behind the bullets that you see here. But you can see that there's just sort of a logical sequence of activities from start to finish. And by finish in this phase, I mean finalizing the research lesson and the whole plan that supports it. Let's see here. So one of the elements of the plan phase is identifying and examining the research lesson. And to explain, identify, and examine, well, identify. You can identify an existing lesson. Let's say that one of the teachers on the lesson study team has a lesson that he or she's developed and used before. The others agree that it would serve as a good basis for creating the research lesson. So it's a matter of working from that original lesson and expanding it and building it and tweaking it to make it the best possible lesson it can be as a research lesson. Or the team can decide to draft the research lesson from scratch. There's no one right way to do it. It's whatever the team decides works best for them. And that last bullet, we're going to talk about a little bit more, do the central task of the lesson. This is a unique component of lesson study, which is really, really powerful. Also, as part of the plan phase, data collection is planned. And by data collection, we mean two basic things. First, within the research lesson itself, an assessment is developed. So an assessment of the students who were in class on the day of the research lesson. And then secondly, identifying what data observers should collect when they are observing the delivery of the research lesson. In other words, exactly what student behaviors do we want to record? What student actions, responses, verbal, nonverbal responses, what is it that we've decided is really important to capture as that part of the data collection that occurs during the execution of the research lesson. And now going back to the bullet I pointed out, oops, I don't know how that happened. Hold on a second. Here we go. Part of the process includes teaching a mock-up lesson. So if I'm the team member who has volunteered to present the research lesson on behalf of the team, I practice it with my team. I present it, and my co-collaborators take on the roles of students responding to the prompts that we have created in this collaboratively formed research lesson. So everyone gets a better and better sense of projecting how students are going to respond. This gives us a platform later to compare how students actually responded to how we expected them to respond. It's a really, really powerful aspect of lesson study. So, you know, we have great intent, And then what really happens may or may not match it. And this is, again, really helpful in setting the stage for us to understand what and how our students reacted and why. And Sue, I believe we're going to hear from Audrey and Lisa now, is that right?
Yeah, so Lisa and Audrey, can you tell us a bit about your lesson study experience with preparing, studying, and planning?
Yeah, I'm still really thinking about the slide with the triangles of the US versus Japan, and how isolated most US teachers are. That, you do your lesson plan by yourself, you execute it, and then you reflect yourself, or maybe you don't even reflect yourself because you got to hurry up and worry about the next lesson that you're going to teach. And when you sign up for lesson study, that your peers, like the part of the premise is that they're going to observe you. And I think that's enough to make some people a little sheepish or shy away. So I think it's important to really spell out that you are signing up to be vulnerable. The eyes are going to be on you when it's your turn to be observed, but that is not something necessarily to be feared, because in our case, we did not choose a pre-made lesson. We created our own lesson, and we did it collaboratively. Therefore, during the observation, if the lesson doesn't go so well, we're all collectively accountable. It's not that like, oh, this teacher just executed it wrong. You painstakingly create a lesson plan that's very explicitly spelled out, because we're all going to do the same thing. And so again, there's this other sense of collective accountability. So I think that helps take away the fear of, having your peers observe you, which I don't know about in your all's context, but in my context in adult ed, it hasn't been very common. The only time that I'm usually ever observed is if my administrator is doing an evaluation of me, right? And we'll get more into like the results of being observed, but I just want to say that it's not that whole process of planning. You're really doing a lot of team building, and a lot of the fear of those observation really dissipates as you get ready to start observing each other.
Thank you,
Audrey?
Lisa.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I want to continue on that thought because, being so individualistic, and us teachers, our classroom is our castle. And so to start from right the beginning of a more collective mindset is a whole new thing. And so, when we were given the amount of time to do the studying and the planning and the researching and all that, it was such a huge amount of time. I think Sue, you gave us 2 months or something. It was like, what, you as an individual, you just come up with your lesson really quickly in a few hours, but so much of it was learning how to be a team, learning how to think collectively rather than individually. And it took that much time. It took so much time. And the idea that there's a process that is proven and you just stick with it. And we realized, this is the real situation of trusting the process, that we needed 2 months to just kind of get in a rhythm where we actually trusted each other's, our own experiences. We could respect the differences of the way we approached the classroom, or just learning how to, personalities, right? Getting along. I mean, so much of this, it was even before getting to the place of, okay, let's craft this lesson. It was incredible how long that part took. It was probably the most painstaking part of the whole process. But it really, it was awesome. I mean, because you were forced to have learn how to have an open mind, how to be curious together, how to be accountable, like come up with your part that you and not let the team down. So it was good.
And I'll add one more thing. I think as teachers too, we form these habits of like, well, this is how I lesson plan and this is how I execute things. And so when we were planning the lesson, we didn't necessarily agree, like, no, we should do it this way. I don't know, we should do it that way. And like, you really have to just, like Audrey said, have an open mind and be like, okay, I'm going to try to execute this lesson in a way that kind of fits. And in our situation was 3 different teachers, fits the mold of 3 different teachers, 3 different teacher style. And that is not very easy to do when you're kind of like, no, my way works. But then when you do the mock lesson, then things reveal themselves, shall we say.
Thank you for your perspectives of what it really looks like. So now let's move on to the next stage of teach and observe.
Thanks, Sue. So we've looked at the study phase and the plan phase. Now it's time to teach and observe. It's common to invite people other than fellow team members to the observation, especially if you have a small team and a large class. Because remember, the observers are there to observe students and to record what students say and do and how students respond. So often orienting observers who aren't part of the team is a key part of preparing to do the research lesson in the classroom. And then you're going to review the observation protocols and the tools that the team has come up with. I understand that in several years ago, there is a lesson study data collection app that at that time at least was free and widely available, and a lot of people really loved it. It was customizable for any type of lesson study cycle. So that's a fun little tech tool to have in your back pocket there. In any case, everyone knows exactly how the lesson is going to unfold and is ready to collect certain types of data at strategic times during the lesson. And I think we're going to hear right away from Lisa and Audrey again, right?
Yeah. So what was the teach and observe phase like for you?
It was awesome. Again, I think sometimes, prior to lesson study, if anyone asks you, like, oh, do you know what's happening in your class? Do you know what's going on with your students? Most teachers are going to say like, well, of course I know what my students are doing. Of course I know what's happening in the classroom. I know who's struggling. I know who's on point, yada, yada, yada. But lesson study really shows you that like, it is physiologically impossible for your 2 eyes to be on everyone at any single moment, right? And so again, in our context, we had a group of 6. So when I was teaching, I now had 4 other eyes on my students that I couldn't possibly have. And the insights were incredibly valuable. Some were jaw-dropping, like what was going on over in that corner, or what was this student doing, or whatnot. And it really, I think you take for granted of like that, what's happening in your classroom, and then you've got people assigned to look for very specific things, and you may be surprised by the results. So going back to what we were talking about just a minute ago, if there is any fear about being observed, that quickly goes away by the depth, the value in the feedback that you get from your peers afterwards.
Thank you.
Yeah. In our observation, we had another set of eyes because we were also videotaped.
Oh yeah.
Well, the students were videotaped, not the teachers. So we could see so much more on the video of of how the students were reacting from on the opposite side of the table of the room from where you were. And so this is the most humbling part of the whole experience, was that I think, Lisa, you were videoing the pre-literates in my group, and I was way over, you know, with the literate ones, the literacy ones. And then you had them like a mountain of fruit and papers and photos and pictures, colors. I mean, it was a mountain and scissors, and they didn't know what they were supposed to do. And they're just looking, and I'm just like, my body's faced away from them. I mean, and I had no idea. I mean, until I saw, that was one of the things that Lisa was saying, jaw dropping, because it was like, I didn't see that. I didn't see how much they were struggling. And my class was the first round. And so we really cleaned that one up, you know, the second one and the third, but that was like horrendous. So, but I think that part was, that observation piece was the most valuable part, because then it would force us to then say, well, why observation forced us to look at that piece and do more inquiry, and just changing the way we look at how we design our lesson, because our students weren't getting it clearly, you know. So it was amazing.
Well, thank you for your honesty. And the next phase is reflect. Jacques?
Thanks, Sue. So after the incredibly fun experience of teach and observe, then you move on to reflect and share. And you take a couple of sessions to do the process that you see on the screen there. Pretty self-explanatory. These meetings should follow a customized, tailored protocol specifically for this part of lesson study. Again, the importance of facilitation. The protocol is easy to find. It's on the Mills Lesson Study Group website, and there are variations of it all over the place, but you have to know it's there, and you have to use it in order for it to contribute as well as it does in real life. So, you know, essentially you're going to use this analysis process to answer, did students learn as expected? Did our work unfold, and did it work as expected? And where do we go from here? And so where do we go from here leads us to this key part of the reflection and analysis stage. Are we completely happy with our research lesson as it is, in which case we wrap it up and put a bow on it, and we share with our colleagues what we learned from it so everyone can benefit from it? Or if we're not satisfied, do we put in the work of revising and repeating it? Most lesson study groups worth their salt and who are being honest find themselves revising and repeating on a pretty regular basis. That's part of the process, and it's where much greater growth and learning occurs, and where the elevation of your most professional skill occurs. And I think as part of the reflection process, you revisit these questions that you had in mind at the beginning. You know, what did I learn? What am I going to carry forward? So your personal application, and then your process improvement. What did we learn about how we did lesson study, so that in the next cycle we can do it even better? And then some other kinds of reflection and sharing items. These are some of the questions that teams go through to assess how well they did, and again, to inform either their next round, which may be a revision round or maybe a completely new cycle. And I think Lisa and Audrey have some good stuff to share regarding this as well.
Should I chime in now, Jacques?
Yeah, Sue, did you have a specific question or should they just, yeah, go ahead, please.
Okay, yeah, you know, I'm thinking right now, so I currently have the luxury of teaching, I'm teaching an ESL beginning high class, teaching the class in the morning and in the evening. So I currently have the luxury of like making my lesson plan, teaching in the morning, and whatever didn't work, I have the afternoon to revise it, right? And I teach it again in the evening. But first of all, we don't all have that luxury. Usually we teach our class, you maybe think about what worked and didn't work, and then you don't think about it again until, you know, a few months down the line or a year later when you're going to teach that class again. What would be nice this time is if between my morning class and my evening class, I had folks like Audrey and Sue and Jacques watching and getting their feedback as well, us all kind of discussing it together, because just like any discussion that you have, you know, if you're thinking about any kind of topic, whether it's education or politics or whatever, you have your own ideas. But then when someone else pipes in and brings in their perspective, then that informs your thinking and maybe causes you to think deeper. And then you may say something that you hadn't thought of because it's based on what someone else just said, and so on and so forth. And the pinging back and forth between like the collective mind. So now instead of one brain, you have 3 or 4 or whatnot, just allows you to go much, much deeper into how to better execute the plan that you could possibly do by yourself. So that's one of the great things about the reflection phase. It's just you get way much more traction than you would by yourself. Audrey, what do you think?
Yeah, I think so. I think it's been said already, and Jacques, your great points. But I think the thing that in this reflection stage for me, it really was I could see the evolution of how I changed and how I reflected. Even before, it was lots of reflection, but it was like, oh, how could I, just criticisms about me as a teacher or criticisms of another person, observing them, right? How the performance went, but shifting that, making a shift, and it was gradual, but it was, but by the end, by round 3, it really was so much like we together were this collective group that we were observing together, our students, and we're taking their cues to see how are they learning and how do we guide that, more effectively. And so I think that's lesson study.
And for me as an administrator, that was the one phase that I asked to join, because in the reflection phase was when I could see teacher growth. And that was so exciting for me. Thank you. So now let's look at some challenges of lesson study. In Poll Everywhere, please list some challenges that you see in implementing lesson study in your program. Jacques, Lisa, and Audrey, if you want to add to the list either verbally or in Poll Everywhere, please do. Time constraints. Yes, it does take a lot of time, as Audrey mentioned. Again, virtually. So we'll prepare to talk about virtual implementation next week. Coordinating schedules.
Yes.
A lot of logistics here. Yes. Which Audrey and Lisa talked about working with other teachers.
And I want to comment about the different points of view on how to teach something. When you observe the research lesson and look at the data from your observation, those kinds of different viewpoints start to fall by the wayside. Because if you've been guided by the central question, are students learning to the expected level that we've set for them? If the answer is yes, after the research lesson, you can say, well, that worked. And if the answer is no, you say, well, that didn't work. And you let that fall. And when you revise the lesson, that's the part you revise. So this is a wonderful way of elevating the professionalism of everyone. In the beginning, when you're contributing to the research lesson, like any and all ideas are worth considering. After you deliver it, you are whittling away what does not work. And what's left is what you know works. That's the beauty of lesson study.
Thank you, Jacques. And someone mentioned here a topic, and perhaps we'll discuss next week about selecting a good topic. So next, and we will address these challenges next week. Next are some keys to success, which again we'll discuss in more detail next week. But for now, I'd like to highlight 3 of them. The first, which Jacques mentioned before, right size your lesson study projects. Start small and start with volunteers. The third bullet, start strategically to educate and empower the team, which you saw from our guests how important that is, and which you know from the challenges. The 5th bullet, invest in the infrastructure with meeting times, resources, and focused leaders. And Jacques, what do you mean, no mud, no lotus?
Well, it's a little bit like no pain, no gain, right? Beautiful things rarely emerge without a little suffering along the way. And I think that's what happens in lesson study. The process, it can be really eye-opening and unflattering sometimes to us as professional educators, but what comes out of it is really beautiful for students and for teachers.
Yes, thank you. And Lisa and Audrey, words of success.
I just want to highlight the magnitude of teacher learning that happens during lesson study. During some of our pre-reflection for today's session, we were talking about how, for at least me personally, I can't tell you how many times I've gone to, say, the state CATESL conference or CCAE or OTAN's Technology and Distance Learning Symposium or the CASA Summer Institute, and I'll go to a session and I'll get some handouts, and at the end of it all, it goes in a folder, and right? And there's no implementation, or maybe I'll get around to implementing it at some point in the future. This is like you're on the bullet train, right? You're all in every little component of not only your lesson planning, but your execution is in the spotlight for a number of months. And so it's just it's like years of professional development all in this very intensive project. And so I'm very grateful that I was able to participate when I was still, a fairly new educator, and I'm still reaping the benefits from it.
Lesson study, I think it's one of the most powerful tools for any administrator to get behind if they want to make a culture shift in how adult education looks like. It's going to do it quickly. And I totally agree that starting small with people who really buy into it. So from the bottom, well, not bottom, but I mean, from the teacher level, that they actually experience in a small group. And that excitement, just as Lisa and I are doing our best to communicate, that excitement coming from the top of the administrator who says, I am committing 40 hours or whatever, to provide this for my teachers so that they could experience something that will change their, instructional competency forever. And for the two to come together and and for that to go forward is going to shift the culture of how we even respect each other as a program, and how we listen to each other. I think our staff meetings will change because of it. It's a huge thing. That it's a culture change. That's all the best way I could describe it.
Dare I say that lesson study is transformative?
Yeah, it is.
Yeah, so let's use a waterfall to show our appreciation to Audrey and Lisa. We wait and all submit our comments together at the same time so that they will be showered with our appreciation. So please take a moment to write a few words, but don't submit in the chat until I give the cue to go. Back, Jacques.
I'm not sure what's happening.
There we go, right there. All right. So if our webinar participants can write a few words, but don't submit until I say go. And then the comments will be a waterfall effect for Lisa and Audrey. Okay. All right. I'm going to count to 3 and say go. 1, 2, 3, go.
Whoa.
Thank you, Lisa and Audrey.
That's great.
Yeah, because Dave's is at the bottom, real teachers. That's what we wanted to give you today, the real deal. All right, so let's it's time to wrap up. Our objectives today, we hope that you now better understand. Nope, not yet. Yeah. Better understand the elements of each phase of the lesson study cycle to begin considerations for planning and implementation. Now let's take a moment for you to take a moment to reflect on your learning this afternoon and poll everywhere. Our first reflection question is not squaring. We're skipping that one, Jacques.
Okay, here we go.
Okay, there we go. Our first reflection question is, what are 1 to 3 big points about lesson study that you're taking away today? And keep in mind what Audrey and Lisa have shared with you. And I'm also taking a moment to read your comments in the chat. First, an honest conversation. That's what we wanted to give you today. Growing as an educator, thank you. Seeing students. Importance of a facilitator role. Jacques, you emphasize that, yes. And improving your reflection of your teaching. Ultimately, that's what it's about, improving the experience of our students and teachers as learners. Yes. Okay, and the next question, what new questions about lesson study are circling in your mind now? And we will address, please put all your questions here and we will address them next week. Jacques is nodding yes, virtual. How to start?
It's okay to be overwhelmed now. We dumped a lot of information on you, we know. Come back next week, it'll be a much slower pace.
And the best way to get to know how to do anything is just doing it. I think Audrey and I were really overwhelmed in the beginning too. And then, you know, when we were through, when we got through the whole process, it was like, that was awesome. Let's do it again.
Yeah, and I must say, I did do it 2 times. And the second time with Lisa was a ton better.
There are questions about time and support and infrastructure coming up here. We'll be addressing a lot of them next week and brainstorming with you, because at every site, the answer is going to be a little different.
And I saw a couple of questions here and previously about adult ed. Teachers are on different schedules and how does this work? And I'm happy to share what we did in Oakland. Well, the next one is a question about long-term effects. Lisa briefly addressed that 10 years later. She is, well, Lisa, do you want to reiterate yourself?
Yeah, I mean, I'm very conscious that I cannot be watching all of my students at once. And so just being a little more hyper aware in the classroom of what's going on, but also shifting to like really inviting collaboration, try to encourage my different administrators that I've had along the way to, even if it's not formal lesson study, to at least allow more peer observation at my site, to kind of dispel that fear and to bring in more collaboration. I think, yeah, I think it's awesome.
Thank you. Jacques, there you go.
Right, so here are some resources that we hope you will look out if you are thinking of implementing lesson study. That first one at the top is a repeat of what I mentioned earlier. To me, that is the ultimate in terms of practical lesson study stuff you can use, all housed under the same roof, the Mills College Lesson Study Group. And then a few other different articles there. At the bottom, there are a couple of books, step-by-step instructions for how to implement lesson study. Of course, they are not written for adult ed, and you have to do your own interpretation of it, but the basic steps are still the same, and they're really relatively easy to do, especially if you're starting small. Next week, I will come up with a few more resources based on some of the requests and comments that came out today. So look for that if you join us next week.
Okay, I think that Laura is, we'll skip this. You know that next week is office hours. Laura has put a link to the registration, the evaluation in the chat. And we want to thank our guests, Lisa and Audrey, for joining us today, and to Sachiko and Laura behind the scenes. And thank you for coming today. And we hope to see you again next week for Webinar 3, Lesson Study Office Hours.
Please join us. Thanks. Bye, everyone.
Bye.